Master is an all-powerful person, but with me around, he seemed unable to fully believe in his own achievements. Therefore, after much hardship, I have made the difficult decision to use you. Someone explained it to me like this. Who are you? I am Ciel the Manas, the wisdom core, who exists for the supreme Rimuru-sama. It was interesting that he was considered supreme, putting himself aside. Veldanava thought. Before that, it is incomprehensible that the divine wisdom core manas can be so emotional and act so freely. If we believe his words, the person who called himself Ciel said that he had used Veldanava. In other words, that meant that he had purposely separated himself from Rimuru. Even if you believe that you are the wisdom core manas, are you saying that you thought Rimuru would win without you? Veldanava asked that question. The mana's divine wisdom core is specialized in calculation ability. Its existence is top secret and only known to a select few, but it is extremely useful for activating skills and magic. Even Veldanava found it hard to believe that this manas would abandon his role as his master's advisor. However, Ciel answered calmly. Even without my assistance, Master's win rate was 100%, so there's no problem. Besides, I had another important goal. Ciel said that this was a move that was made precisely because she was confident that Rimuru would win, as evidenced by the current results. That was quite a bit of confidence in front of the god Veldanava. However, since the current situation was such that it looked like that was going to happen, Veldanava had mixed feelings. Ignoring Veldanava, Ciel complained. Even so, Master is a real problem. He has no room for carelessness, exposing himself like that. It was a story that had nothing to do with the battle. Rimuru had changed from his beautiful girl appearance to that of an adult man. But Ciel was not happy about this. She had never expected him to act like this, and it was completely outside of her calculations. But on the other hand, I also felt relieved. Ciel was worried about Rimuru. Although he is invincible, he is completely unaware of it. When asked for help, he cannot refuse and faces the pressure with only a sense of responsibility. Rimuru is such a kind-hearted and lovable person. This time, too, he is probably feeling anxious inside, but putting on a strong front in front of his friends. And perhaps she was sad that Ciel was gone. As Ciel's master, Rimuru has no limits and is omnipotent and the strongest. That was what Ciel wanted to teach Rimuru. Even so, it was a miscalculation that Rimuru would imitate the appearance of Third Mai, Jo, Kami, Satoru, and Satoru. Ciel was confident that she could read everything through, but Rimuru was not as easy to deal with as she had hoped, easily exceeds expectations. This time, it was carried out in an unpleasant way. Fortunately, the battlefield is in chaos. Master has not yet been seen, so let's have him return quickly and return to his original state. Ciel lamented that her insignificant mistake of misreading Rimuru's movements and not caring about Veldanava, the strongest being, was a huge blunder. On the contrary, she declared that she would return to Rimuru's side as if it was a matter of course. Ciel's attitude was enough to make even Veldanava shudder. What on earth is this? Is there a fatal bug in the world I created that has given birth to such an incomprehensible being? If the master is a master, then the servant is also a servant. Ciel's reasoning was too disturbing to be dismissed as mere bluffing. I was also curious about his other purpose. It was probably something related to Lucia. Rather than questioning Ciel, he decided to confirm it first. This is no time to worry about bugs. What's more important is Lucia. The most important thing to Veldanava was not someone like Ciel, whose true identity was unknown. The being who called herself Lucia was far more important and of interest. Are you really Lucia? Veldanava asked not at Ciel, but at another presence. The nostalgic atmosphere makes you convinced that it is the real thing. There is no doubt about it. Yes, that's right. Ciel here gathered the fragments of my soul and restored me. The Lucia Veldanava had been looking for was none other than herself. The person who deserves this honor is Ciel. I reluctantly possessed you in order to recreate her. It was a difficult decision, Ciel said. He looked really unhappy and wanted to return to Rimuru right away. Ciel combined the many elements that had gathered around Rimuru, as well as the Lucia factors that Veldanava had collected and succeeded in recreating. Lucia. The heart is a fickle thing, and even the missing soul and authority reside in it. Moving from place to place, it was precisely because the true essence of skills was born from the desires of people that such a phenomenon occurred. Ciel spent a long time deciphering it and uncovering the truth. Shizue Izawa, Hinata Sakaguchi, Chloe Ober, and several others had fragments of Lucia's genes scattered throughout them. They had all been collected through Rimuru and then integrated by Ciel. And now, Lucia's soul separates from Rimuru's. It's finally finished. There are still some missing elements, so it's not perfect, but the match rate is over 99%. Veldanava's sword memory was also reading Lucia's memories. Since her heart is genuine, and her personality and memories have been recreated, there is no other way than to declare that she is the real Lucia. Lucia, really. Velda, I'm sorry I made you sad because I wasn't there. Most important thing to Veldanava was to bring Lucia, whom he loved with all his heart, back to life. That was all. Even though she no longer had a physical body, Lucia was an almost complete soul and had Yellow Night Spring Sea Return returned. The goal seemed to have been achieved. Veldanava was overwhelmed with emotion. However, happiness does not last long. Kyaha, the dragon of destruction, has not yet been destroyed. Chapter 5, Creation Myth. Let's go back in time a little. With the help of Sauka and his subordinates, Moss, and others who were suited to gathering information, Saoi had grasped every corner of the battlefield. This information will be compiled and delivered to Benimaru. Based on this, accurate analysis and judgment were made, and appropriate instructions were sent to each department. This paved the way to victory. However, this was overturned by the harassment that Veldanava committed. Jahil, Cornu, and Vega, these three were summoned by Veldanava and inhabited the bodies of Swim, Habitaki, and Keikashi, who were supposed to have been defeated, creating a threat that surpassed even the true dragons. What should we do? We have no choice but to withdraw our main forces and let them deal with the situation. If it comes down to it, I'll step in. I understand. I'll help you then. Saoi and Benimaru finished the meeting very easily. Afterwards, Benimaru's orders were given to once again direct the military forces. The main warriors left from each side and began to fight against these three evil gods. This caused some people to struggle, but no one complained. Rather, it only increased their enthusiasm, and the battlefield became even more heated. In fact, on the battlefield, Mizari and Rain, who had inherited the sanctuary secret technique from Ruminas, were constantly casting recovery magic. Therefore, it was very stable. The holy purification barrier, holy field, is still in good condition. The cryptids, the mystical beast tribe that had descended from the Tensukaku and appeared one after another, were caught up in the battle between Ivalage and Milim and had all disappeared. Therefore, a plan was currently underway to wipe out the remaining cryptid forces. On the ground, victory was within reach. However, if you let your guard down, the situation on the battlefield can be reversed in an instant. This was because even the weakest cryptids possessed combat abilities comparable to those of the demon lords, posing an overwhelming threat to the heroes who had gathered here. The reality was that they had barely succeeded in defeating them one by one. Thanks to the use of Holy Purification Barrier, Holy Field, and tactical cooperation. Still, things are somehow working out, proving that Benimaru's decision was correct. We'll also risk our lives to hold on, so please win. HMPH, don't say such nice things. If you don't come back alive, your wife will be angry with you. It was a conversation between Kalgurio and Minutes, who had effectively become the top players in the East. After seeing off Emperor Masyuki as he set out for battle, they were commanding the soldiers while cracking jokes. This lifted their spirits and helped to ease their anxieties. To the south, there are white-winged eagles. Demonic rulers such as Veyron, Zonda, Khan, and Misora are still alive and well. Victory to the heroes. Queen Mayu of Farminas, also known as Mulan, prayed, and the Holy Purification Barrier, Holy Field, began to shine brighter. As if watched over by that radiance, the heroes led by Yaomu also gave it their all. In the west, Ciel, Gregory, and Glenda are in command. You're kidding me, right? In a situation like this, I wish you wouldn't force such an important role on me, a traitor. Don't say that, Ciel. If we put our all into this and do our best, we'll be recognized. By God again, right? Well, that's certainly true. This land is filled with Rumina's-sama's love, so running away is not an option. Yes, that's right. All we have to do is pray to God with an empty heart and slaughter our enemies. Unlike those two simple-minded people, Glenda is realistic. How foolish, if you die it's all over. And even before that, deserting in the face of the enemy is unforgivable, even if you die. Or rather, it wasn't Rumina's love that filled him right now. I think it was meant as encouragement from the demons to work hard and not slack of, but Glenda wasn't rude enough to say so. Besides, this battlefield is under Saoi's supervision. Whether to run away or not is a question that goes beyond the choice. Well, I guess I'll let you dream. And so Glenda showed a kindness that was unusual for her. In the north, Adalman and Gadra were fighting with all their might. Thanks to this, they have a huge advantage. Some of the cryptids, mythical beasts, are resistant to magic, but they are exterminated without any hesitation. Let's keep this up and finish this quickly. That's right, we must hurry and help in other areas. Their success here had almost secured their dominance, but... And then time stopped. Jahil was defeated by Yuuki, but the pain of endless death suddenly disappeared. By some means or another, the soul was called back to the world and took up residence in Swim's corpse. Similarly, Kornu resided in Habataki, and Vega was fused with Keikashi. Jahil remembers the fear of death. Therefore, the thirst for life is never satisfied. That eternal pain, filled with despair, had completely disappeared. When that happens, all I remember is my resentment towards Yuuki. Yuuki's attack, crazy for death-lost entropy, completely annihilated even his soul, and yet, for some reason, he retained all of his memories and grudges. I won't forgive you. I'll forgive you, Yuuki. Jahil shouted. It was also an act of inspiring his mind, as if to escape the fear of death. Standing before Jahil are warriors who have a connection with him. It seems you've chosen me. With a wry smile, Yuuki stood in front of Jahil. Naturally, behind Yuuki were Laplace, Kagali, Tia, and even Mai, standing by as support personnel. There are other people who are familiar with Jahil. Oh dear, is that going to happen again? Oh, if Leon can take care of it by himself, I won't have to do anything reckless. Well, I completely agree with the opinion that I'm already tired of it, but I'd like you to show some manliness and attitude, here. Turn down. Despite being teased by Elmesia and Sylvia, Leon is determined to fight Jahil to the end. Joining the battle were Ultima and Carrera. Honestly, maybe just me is enough. Isn't that what I should be saying? You should stay quietly on the sidelines and not get in the way. And what? Are you up for it? They still get along well. Ultima and Carrera glared at each other, their hostility towards each other clearly visible, as if they had no regard for Jahil. Seeing the two of them like that, the others held their heads in their hands, but also felt hopeful. Cornu didn't even understand why he had died. The last thing he remembers is a desperate pain and the approaching flames. Only after reviving like this did he realize that it was Velgrind's attack. Don't mess with me, Velgrind Duwu. Cornu roared. That unrestrained yell alone was enough to create shock waves. Even a demonic beast of the Demon Lord class would not be left with even a speck of dust if hit by it. But however, it was easily cut down with a single sword. Shut up, you just woke up and you're in a bad mood. Well, whatever, I'm going to kill you. Don't go calling my beloved Grun by his first name. The one who said this was Rudra, who had the earth god Diva in his hands. Rudra had intended to face Jahil, but now that things had turned out, that was a different story. He held Velgrind around the waist and had a fearless smile on his face. Incidentally, within Rudra, Masyuki's consciousness was still alive and well. Oh no, I'll probably end up bedridden again with things like soul-deep pain. Sore. But well, it's better than dying, Masyuki thought, cheering himself on. Rudra and the others were not the only ones standing before Cornu. Carrion, Midley, and Frey are watching. His old friends Zalario, Obra, and even Feldway were there. Since Feldway is there, Diablo is naturally there too. For the Cornu of old, this would have been excessive force. However, now Cornu has changed so much that he seems like a completely different person. The outcome of the battle was still unknown. Vega resided in the cliff, but he had changed even more than Jahil and Cornu. Lonely. And then fear. In the empty space, where there was no one around, Vega truly understood these things. It is a miracle that I am still alive. His indelible ego remembered the memory of his own ruin in the distant future. Oh, I made it back, ha ha ha. I did it, God didn't abandon me. A surge of joy filled Vega. Seeing Vega like that, the beautiful White Queen, Testarossa, sneered. Oh, I heard that you were completely wiped out by Diablo and his men, but you managed to survive. Testarossa said this while looking down at Vega as if appraising him. Hinata stood next to Testarossa and coldly declared, people don't like persistent men, you know. Vega had escaped from the royal capital of Ingratia. This time, the two beauties looked determined not to let him get away. Standing alongside these two was Shin. I'll have to punish that foolish guy. My body is warmed up and I'm feeling better. So I think I'll be able to fight at full power soon. Gabuta and Ranga were the ones who shivered at this. Shin-san was causing a big commotion just now, right? Gapta, even my memory is not wrong in that recognition. Shindono was certainly unrivaled. Isn't that right? Yes. Gabble joined the conversation, nodding vigorously. That's right. I don't think Shindono was dissatisfied. If it was Shin, it seemed possible, Gabble thought. Gabuta and Ranga were the same, and felt a sense of awe towards Shin. At this point, those who remained unfazed stepped forward. Hush, there's no problem. All we have to do is defeat the enemy. That's right, let's show our might. With Gerudo and Kumara's words as the signal, the battle with Vega began. The three resurrected, Jahil, Cornu, and Vega, were fighting in their own unique ways. Jahil, who had been fixated on Yuuki, the man responsible for his death, quickly changed his target. Or rather, because Ultima and Carrera had launched a fierce attack, it was no longer possible to ignore it. Not bad. Please entertain me more and more. By being given slime cells by Rimuru, or rather by being forced to accept them. After begging for them, Ultima and Carrara had gained new powers. The body that was already familiar to him had become even more perfect. A body that would not break even if he used his original power, no matter how powerful the magical power, it would not be a burden on his new body. Not only that, but he even had a high resistance and affinity to the extremely dangerous nothingness. There was no risk, and he could use forbidden techniques and spells as much as he wanted. There was no way they could lose in their current state. This was the common view shared by the two of them. Looks like I won't have a role to play here. It seems like even I won't have a chance to shine. It was a pleasant surprise this time, but that aside, I'm worried about the future. Exactly. Like Yuki and his party, Leon, Elmesia, and the others also did not want to force themselves into fighting. Even though my injury has healed, I still feel tired, so I would like to rest if possible. What worries me is how much the two original members have been strengthened. It seemed that they would become increasingly difficult to control in the future. This means that Rimuru's camp has become incredibly stronger. The balance between nations is already beginning to collapse, but there will be a mountain of headaches after the war, Elmesia said, holding her head in her hands. Still, it is fortunate in the sense that it gives us the time to think about the future. Although it seemed like it would be difficult, Hermesia's expression brightened. Kigali harbors a deep-seated grudge against Jahil. Not only resentment, but also hatred. But there is. To be honest, the difference in ability is so great that it seems like nothing I do will work. That was my true feelings. Jahil now possessed an amount of magical energy that rivaled or even surpassed that of a dragon, and possessed terrifying recovery abilities and extremely powerful destructive methods. From Kaguri's perspective, this was like reaching the realm of the gods. His rational judgment prevailed over his emotions and told him that he shouldn't force himself to get involved. Moreover, Ultima and Carrara were far too overwhelming. Are they on bad terms, or are they on good terms? Although they complained about each other as if they were at odds with each other, their cooperation was nothing short of impressive. Not bad moves. If you had been given Rimuru-sama's power and yet showed such a shameful performance in battle, I was planning to purge you with my own hands, but oh well. Diablo, who had appeared before anyone noticed, commented on how the two were fighting. It's a condescending view from afar, and it's more refreshing than shocking. Weren't you with someone else? Kigali asked timidly. Leon and the others were listening intently, but Diablo answered without paying any attention to them. HMPH, if I go out it will be over in an instant. I can't take away their chance to shine right. It was an incredible amount of confidence, but to those who knew Diablo, it was no surprise. Diablo continued. I would like to observe Rimuru-sama's exploits, but that's not possible. Since this is an order from Rimuru-sama, I have no choice but to be here, Diablo said, trying to endure the pain. As if to prove his words, Cornu, who was at the first place Diablo headed, was fighting Ridra on equal terms. Cornu was killed in a surprise attack by Velgrind, but he was a top-class warrior and a confidant of the Yakai demon Ma King, Feldway. What's more, he had now fused with the power of Habataki. He was not an opponent that could be easily defeated. He was no easy opponent, but Diablo didn't see it that way. To begin with, the person facing Cornu head-on was strong. This was only natural, as Rudra was an equal match with Guy. If Rudra had been in his original body, rather than inhabiting the body of an ordinary boy named Masayuki, he would have been able to defeat Cornu all by himself. Unfortunately, Rudra currently lacks that level of power, and it would be difficult for him to defeat Cornu alone. However, from Diablo's point of view, it wasn't a problem. This is because there were other strong people there besides Rudra. Specifically, there was Feldway, whom Diablo had brought to the battlefield. There were also some of Cornu's old friends, Zalerio and Obra. Verbal persuasion had already begun, and judging from Cornu's confused state, it seemed there was no need for Diablo to intervene. Seeing the situation, Leon, Yuki, and the others agreed with Diablo's words. Certainly, since Rimuru had asked him to, there was no way he would abandon the front line. Not only that, but he also seemed to be keeping a watchful eye over the whole situation, to avoid taking sides and causing the others to be defeated. It's hard to judge whether he has a sense of responsibility or not. Elmesia, who was listening next to him, was also troubled. Regardless, Diablo saw that this place was safe for the time being. Ultima and Carrera won't be defeated so easily. However, please don't let your guard down. You never know what will happen on the battlefield. Diablo said this and left the place. When Diablo arrived, Testarossa and Hinata were struggling against Vega. As expected, Testarossa had already taken possession of the slime cells with just one word. Therefore, she didn't seem to be struggling against Vega and instead went around to support Hinata. This time, they were carrying out a meticulous containment operation to ensure that they would not escape. I see, as expected of Testarossa. Oh, I'm glad you praised me. It's an emotionless exchange, but he's still genuinely praising her and expressing his happiness. Meanwhile, what about Vega? To be honest, I was confused. Damn it, why am I fighting? Why are you targeting me? Vega no longer had any desire to fight. Although he sought strength, it was powerless in the face of loneliness. Therefore, Vega reflected on his actions in his own way. I had an infinite amount of time to reflect on my foolishness. And Vega had arrived at one truth. What's important is to have compassion for others. As proof of this, his former comrades were safe. I could see Yuki in the distance, and I could also confirm that Mai was there too. He was safe. In the end, I was wrong. I thought the boss was a fool for dying while protecting his comrades, but now I'm envious of him. It was an envy towards Yuki that he had never felt before. Although Vega wanted to savor those feelings, there were people who got in his way. Well, I guess I have some connection with these women. They were the ones who had fought Vega in the past. To make matters worse, one of the women, Testarossa, looked extremely dangerous even to Vega. In addition to these two, Shen and Kumara, who seemed full of motivation, joined in the attack. This was causing Vega an indescribable amount of pain. Vega's instincts told him that things would be bad if he continued like this. Vega's impatience led him to act reflexively. Kai, help me. Vega shouted and began evil dragon beast production, using the corpses of the cryptid lying on the ground as bait. With the current Vega, as long as he had enough food, he could create 12 evil dragon beasts at the same time. And there was plenty of food. Moreover, the value of their existence easily exceeded 10 million. It was precisely because Vega currently possessed an incredible amount of magic essence and energy that this was reflected in the evil dragon beast that was created. Although his weaknesses of lacking skill and level remain the same, even his raw strength alone made him a monster with incredible fighting ability. All of these evil dragon beasts were unleashed at once. All 12 evil dragon beasts appeared at the same time and began to go on a rampage, following Vega's confused will. Vega's plan was to escape while the evil dragon beast was rampaging. I have no idea what the current situation is, and I don't see any reason for me to fight. Most of the evil deeds he once committed have long since been forgotten. In fact, I think I've finished my atonement, sin, and guilt. However, that was only Vega's situation. To Hinata and Testarossa, Vega was a hated enemy. Vega's inability to think about this was his limit. When Vega unleashed the evil dragon beast, Velgrind asked Rudra, who was facing off against Cornu. Those troublesome guys have started causing trouble, but shouldn't we call in the heroes again? Rudra Masyuki's heroic soul guidance Hasha no Yorub would be able to take on several evil dragon beasts. It would depend on the separate body. Soul body strength that Velgrind could prepare, but they should be able to turn the tide of battle in their favor. That was what Velgrind thought, but Rudra rejected it. That's impossible. Once a hero is summoned, they've used up all their power. Besides, Haino Yorub is originally a technique that simply unleashes each hero's special move at the same time so as not to burden them. It's difficult even for me to maintain it for an extended period of time. In this case, it wasn't for Rudra, but for Masyuki. The previous, Soul Deep Pain Sore was tough, but even then it was still luck. Rudra explained that if he was not careful, his lifespan would be shortened. Hearing this, Velgrind quickly changed her mind. In that case, let's get the others to do their best. Velgrind seemed to prioritize Masyuki and was unwavering. Thus, the battlefield became even more chaotic. It was Gabuta and the others' job to deal with the evil dragon beasts that Vega had sent out in a panic. Of course, Gabuta and his friends were not the only ones. It would be impossible for Gabuta and Ranga, Gabil and Gerudo, plus one other beast, to face 12 evil dragon beasts. Therefore, Shin and Kumara left Vega behind and headed towards the evil dragon beasts. Not only that, Karian, Midray, and Frey, who had been watching the battle between Cornu and Rudra, also came as reinforcements. Having heard the conversation between Velgrind and Rudra, they decided that they should take action themselves. That makes 8 people plus 1 animal. Leon, Elmesia, and Sylvia, who had realized what was going on, also joined the battle. Even so, there was still one person missing, but Saoi appeared from the shadows and said, "I'll take care of him." This caused Hinata, who had started to move, to turn towards Vega. Vega's plan was wrong. In the end, Testarossa and Hinata were standing in his way, giving him no chance to escape. However, at this point, the situation changes dramatically. The world has come to a halt. As time stopped, the entire battlefield came to a standstill. And so, the outcome of the battle was left in the hands of those who even controlled time. That moment had arrived for Jahil, Cornu, and Vega. All 3 of them simultaneously realized that time had stopped. It was their first experience, but they were able to cope normally. This was thanks to the adaptability of the Evil Age children. By obtaining these bodies, those who inhabited them were also able to adapt to the suspended world. This allowed some people to escape the crisis. It's Vega. Vega and the 12 evil dragon beasts were able to fight on equal terms with the gathered warriors, although their fighting style relied on physical ability and skill. Performance, they also had the troublesome ability to quickly recover if there was a corpse, so they did not back down even when facing those who were superior in strength. Half of the 12 people and 1 beast were pushing back the evil dragon beast without any difficulty, ignoring the difference in their existence values. However, the remaining half were forced to fight a battle that lacked a decisive blow, and they were gradually becoming exhausted. This situation changed completely when time stopped. The only ones around Vega who were able to move around in the suspended world were Testarossa, Shin, and Diablo. Saoi had learned how to deal with this from Diablo, but he still hadn't mastered it. Though he was conscious, he couldn't move his body. The others were all barred from all activity and were left behind on the battlefield. It was a fatal situation, but The reason this was not a decisive battle was because the enemy, evil dragon, beasts, were also unable to move in the suspended world. Vega could probably move if he possessed it, but Vega was not skilled enough to think about such things. Vega himself was struggling to understand what was happening, so there was no way he could think that far. Vega had thought that now was not the time to fight, so this situation was a godsend. Fortunately or unfortunately, it was Hinata who was directly engaged in a sword fight with Vega, while Tensura was a little distance away, deploying nothingness. He was preparing to block Vega's escape route and eliminate him in one go. Vega instinctively sensed the danger, but he was busy fending off Hinata's fierce attack. When this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity presented itself, Vega jumped at it without hesitation. The void that filled his surroundings bared its fangs, as if eating away at Vega's body. However, it was not dense enough to completely wipe out Vega. It hurts, but it's no big deal. It's a big deal. After all, the current Tensura was even more vicious than when she was fighting Velzard. As a result of having the slime cells as her own, she was now able to manipulate nothingness with speed and precision that was incomparable to what she had been able to do before. The pure white world, nihilistic world that Tensura had constructed attacked Vega, ignoring the suspended world. Vega broke through without paying any attention to that, leaving him completely injured. Still, Vega's thinking that there's no problem as long as he's alive can be said to be abnormal in this case. Gee, he's escaped again. In this case, it doesn't seem to be your fault. Oh, it's rare for Diablo to comfort me. I was simply stating the facts. That person survived even after fighting me and Benimaru Dono, even considering that it would be difficult to eliminate him. And then, Diablo continued. It felt a little strange. You feel strange? Yes. When we faced each other in the labyrinth, he was filled with a thirst for power, but I couldn't sense any of that spirit coming from him now. A greedy desire to win. Vega didn't have that at the moment. Diablo saw through this and became suspicious. You think it's no fun to defeat an opponent who has no intention of winning. Your perspective is as misplaced as ever. Tensura concluded, sounding exasperated. Shin nodded in agreement. I agree that Diablo is strange. Besides, there's no need to think too hard about it. If he's an enemy, defeat him. Whether he's an enemy or not can be decided after defeating him. He boldly stated many incorrect opinions. And then she said, they say you should get used to it rather than worry about it. So I think I'll go now, and left chasing Vega. Diablo and Tensura, who were left behind, looked at each other in amazement. There were many things that concerned me, but I have to admit that Shindono has a point. The two nodded vigorously to each other and quickly followed Shin. Standing before Cornu were three old friends. Rudra put away his sword and stood by and watched. Time has stopped, but I can barely move right now. Yeah, Masayuki can't do that. Masayuki can't do anything in this suspended world. Or rather, Rudra adapting to it is abnormal. It was a technique that Veldanava had taught him directly, but it was actually quite strange that he had mastered it. Despite this, Rudra is actually worried about Masayuki. Masayuki's body is nothing more than an ordinary boy, and just housing Rudra is enough for him. With that in mind, he fought Cornu without overdoing it, and it was clear just how superior Rudra's skills were. With Feldway's help halfway through, the strain on his body had lessened. This had led to the current situation, so Rudra would be happy if the battle ended like this. Well, I hope it goes well, but just in case, I need to recover some of my strength. Rudra thought this as he watched the situation unfold. Feldway was standing in front of Cornu. His sword skill, level, and existence value all surpass Cornu's current abilities. If He hadn't accumulated fatigue to the point of exceeding his limits. He would be a powerful warrior who could defeat Cornu all by himself. Feldway, however, lowered his sword and tried to persuade Cornu. Obra and Zalario are also joining in. As expected of the former 7 angels of the origin, none of them were affected by the suspended world. This was only natural, as they had been working as Veldanava's hands and feet since a time when there was no concept of time. Feldway and the others' conversation began with them trying to calm down and excited Cornu. Feldway claims that Cornu is not responsible, as he was simply continuing to invade other worlds on his orders. That's right, Feldway is entirely to blame, insist Obra and Zalario. No, what happened after I died? Cornu asked, confused. It was no longer time to fight. Even the fact that Velgrind had burned everything to ashes was not even on the agenda. Time had stopped, yet the conversation continued as usual, which was quite confusing. Cornu finds these stories hard to accept. Feldway's true purpose in trying to rule all dimensions and the entire world was to revive the god Veldanava. And through complete control, he hoped to eradicate all misfortune. It was an extreme idea to eliminate those who did not submit, but if it was in line with the idea that might is right, then it was also an ideal form. And Cornu was one of those who believed that this was true. Unlike Obra and Zalario, he was the one whose ideology was closest to Feldway's. Complete domination of all dimensions and the entire world is still a long way of. This is because so many derivative worlds have been born from the base world, created by Veldanava, that observation cannot keep up. The underlying idea was to be able to respond to any god who might return to any of these other worlds, but Veldanava, the god, had already returned. If that were to happen, the story would be different, and it seems that they are even planning to go beyond Feldway's expectations and create a new world. It was no wonder that Cornu was confused. In fact, Obra and Zarario were also confused. If our master is heading down the wrong path, isn't it our duty as his subordinates to point that out and correct him? God never makes mistakes. You're the same, aren't you? You're always right and have never wavered. That's because, as a leader, I didn't want to make my subordinates feel uneasy. Feldway began to say, then swallowed. Being a leader is a lonely thing. No one will follow someone who is always wavering and indecisive. The more he listened to his subordinates, the less he knew what the right path was. This was why Feldway insisted on his own idea of justice and forced it on his subordinates. Cornu thought that was the right answer. Sadly, in this situation, Feldway's followers were the most troublesome. What about that? Tell me. Feldway, I believe in you. So that's. For Feldway, who had blind faith in Veldanava, Cornu's argument was painful to hear. If we accept everything on the premise that God is never wrong, there will be no confusion whatsoever. However, in a sense, this was an abdication of responsibility. Individual opinions are meaningless, and there is no meaning to life. Diversity will disappear, and the world will become a lonely place where only God's opinion is reflected. That's right. Thinking about it, I was wrong from the start. Hasn't Veldanava Sama always wished for a world filled with diversity? Veldanava had separated from Evil Age, saying that he did not want to be alone. Even if he was omnipotent and omniscient, there was no way that such a master would ignore their opinions. Feldway had realized this only now. Shouldn't we share our opinions and make better choices? That's stupid. What if I get it wrong? The best outcome will come from the smartest person, that is, you figuring out the correct answer. Feldway said, holding his head. However, I had no reason to deny Cornu's statement. In fact, it was so similar to My own thoughts that I found myself nodding along without even thinking. However, Feldway noticed, having been given the blood of God and Cebu by Rimuru and having returned from the brink of death, he had arrived at one truth. Ah, there he was. This is where he was. My God had not abandoned me. On the contrary, rather, Lord Veldanava trusted me as a program for the birth of a true God. This was Feldway's epiphany. It could also be called a selfish delusion. However, Feldway was filled with deep reverence for Veldanava and his benefactor, Rimuru, who had become the new god. Perhaps because of this, he was unable to abandon Cornu and had begun to listen to the opinions of others. More than ever before, trying to persuade him if possible. That's why it's a quagmire. Obra and Zerario had already looked shocked. No, Feldway was way wrong too. You've committed a grave sin. To begin with, isn't it necessary for you to have the capacity to listen to the opinions of your subordinates? That's important, isn't it? It is because you have no firm beliefs within yourself that you are confused by the words of others. But that also means there's the risk of being swayed by false beliefs. That's the Feldway from earlier. Isn't this going around in circles? Even if you search for the truth in a story that has no correct answer, you're not going to find an answer. And so the discussion continued like this, with no end in sight. Rudra was already resting. Velgrind had already become someone else's concern and was protecting Rudra, who was working hard to recover his strength. Diablo, who happened to be passing by, caught a glimpse of what was happening. But he didn't say anything. He left a scornful look behind him and walked right past the scene. Jahil also realized that time had stopped. It was his first experience, but by being able to sense the information particles, he was able to naturally accept the situation. There were still people standing in Jahil's way. It was Ultima and Karara. Just like before time stopped, the fierce attack continued. And one more, does it feel like time has stopped? The one who muttered this was Yuuki. By observing the flow of time in another world, Yuuki had also developed an immunity to the stopped world. However, that was only because Yuuki was a genius. Mai, who was supposed to be experiencing it with him, was left behind as usual. Even Laplace couldn't even recognize that time had stopped. The same was true for Leon, but even for a former hero, the impossible was impossible. As a result, our fighting power against Jahil had decreased, but that was not a problem. After all, even before time stopped, Ultima and Karara were the only ones fighting. Jahil, and now even Lu.